But I guess we can just talk about how's the weather down there in Texas. Is it warm right now, or are you pumping the AC? Or
Man,
AC is going
it's
full
August in
blast.
Texas. It's hot.
have y'all thought about like doing solar or anything like that down there? You get a lot of sunlight.
Yeah, it's one of those things where what I've looked at so far, the cost, you gotta be willing to spend 20 years,
Yeah.
to kind of, work through the cost of it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
But
not
it's
really a value thing. It's more of like, oh, I feel good about running this nonstop in the summer without like having to use so much energy and a little bit of an
yeah.
offset. All right, cool. I guess we're pretty good. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce you again. It's Mike Riggs, and you are a sales engineer slash like onboarding slash that kind of stuff, right? Like you want to introduce yourself and give us a little background.
You bet. So my name's Mike Riggs, solution engineer, solution architect, whatever you want to call me. Here at Platform 9, built the company for about 4.5 years now. And yeah, it's exactly that. So when we talk to folks that are looking at, they're exploring Kubernetes, they're thinking about going down the Kubernetes road, they want to know more about it, they want to understand, how it fits into their business and how it can help them out. So that's kind of where I sit in the grand scheme of things, is kind of helping folks navigate that little journey up front. And then when we look at more of that kind of then onboarding and kind of helping them out afterwards, that's kind of where Rene steps in and does his thing. So there's a little a little bridge there between my side of the house and Rene's side of the house. So
So y'all work together pretty often. Let's go ahead and introduce Rene too. Rene Soto, solutions architect slash customer success manager.
Yes.
Or
Yeah. So, yeah, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. So, yeah, I'm a solutions architect here at Platform 9, mostly focused on onboarding and technical implementation. So, um, pretty much there for the day one operations, but we'll still work closely with you during like the day two operations as well.
awesome. So let's go ahead and let's start with Mike. So what was your first job in tech? What got you into tech stuff, or what got you interested?
there's a so I'll keep
Without
this as
dating
brief.
you.
I don't want to. I was going to start off. Back in the day, Novell NetWare, and then I thought, wait, no, that makes me sound old. So we're gonna back up from that. But no, I had I originally started off working in the medical industry, so I was an allied healthcare type professional, and the hospital I worked at, and this is a few years ago, was in the process of they were installing a new network system, new health for the healthcare, for record keeping, that sort of stuff. And this was when, healthcare records were just kind of starting to become digital, and computers in hospitals were becoming a thing. And I remember sitting down, the guy that the organization, the company that installed all the computers in the network, he was kind of giving us a walkthrough on it. And when he showed us how we can access, resources on remote machines, I thought to myself, whoa, this is way cooler than what I'm doing. So that was kind of my first sort of look at it, and then from there I decided I'd go back to school, and then get a little education and things computery. But my first initial job was, again, kind of date myself a little bit, back at Nortel Networks when Nortel was a thing. My first job was literally back then. Nortel had what was one of the bigger, if not the biggest, Apple Talk networks. They were all Macintoshes, and they were in the process of basically moving off of that onto PCs. And so they had a part of the company set up that was called PC migration. Literally, my first job in tech was unloading boxes of Dell computers off the back of a truck. So there you go. And
So
it's
what
been a
did you
bit of a journey.
let's say what's before getting into Kubernetes, were you involved in virtualization or anything like that before? Like what was your step into Kubernetes?
Prior,
What was right before it?
prior to Kubernetes, I have a background in big data. I got to make the air quotes, big data. So I was at Hortonworks, and so Hortonworks basically, was kind of that sort of there's a lot of moving pieces in there, but at some point there was a move to kind of some of the underpinnings, the components underneath, to Kubernetes, to containers. And so I had a little bit of exposure to it from there. And then I worked with a person that there at Hortonworks, who was hired by Platform 9, and we kind of talked about it. And Kubernetes, this is a few years ago. At the time, Kubernetes was really looking like this is going to be the future of things. This is where things are going. And so, and in tech industry, you look for that sort of thing where you want to, tie yourself to a technology for a few years, and you kind of ride that little wave for a bit until kind of the next cool thing comes along. So Kubernetes was it, and that's how we got here.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's next. I'm hoping it's kind of like this, because OpenStack definitely kept me busy for 4 to 5 years, and then I saw containers. I was like, oh wow, that seems like it's so much easier. And then you saw in like the OpenStack community, they were trying to move the entire control plane to containers, and we got involved in that a little bit just for like the fun of it. And then I was like, oh, this is so much easier, especially for supporting developers. Like giving a developer a virtual machine versus telling them to here, just launch a container, run this on your machine is a completely different world. Like Vagrant versus like Docker Desktop, it's completely different. Let's go to Rene. So Rene, what was your first job in tech, and what were you doing? And then after your first job in tech, what was the job you had before this one? Like, was it virtualization or something like that before getting into containers?
Yeah. So, well, the thing is with me, like I've always been passionate about working with customers, and that even goes back to various jobs that I had in college and even in high school. But I think what really drives me is like setting up customers for success. And so I started my career in tech pretty much immediately after college by providing support for HP public cloud. And that's what really got me into the whole cloud and infrastructure space. And then after that is whenever I joined Mirantis as an OpenStack operations engineer. And I was there for a few years. I learned a lot. And that's whenever I decided to make the move to Platform 9. And this is also where I really got more exposed to Kubernetes and containerization. And the thing is, like, even though I thought I learned a lot at Mirantis, and I really did, but I had no idea what my journey at Platform 9 was actually going to look like. But I think that like having the freedom at Platform 9 to shine in different areas really enabled me to figure out what I'm truly passionate about. So I joined Platform 9 as a support engineer, and I did that for almost a couple of years until I became the first technical account manager.
What were you
And
supporting at first? Was it like OpenStack, or was it directly to Kubernetes?
it was at the time, I would say like at the time it was like 75% OpenStack, 25% Kubernetes, and then, kind of changed a little bit over time.
Gotcha.
Oh
Awesome. All
yeah.
right, let's go back to Mike, and we'll actually start talking about our topic now that we've kind of got to know you a little bit. So Mike, what would be like the day one, like, oh, I want to move to containers or Kubernetes or something like that. What are the conversations you usually have with people that are looking to do that? Like, what kind of things do they ask you, and what is the first step?
Yeah. No, it's and so people, there's a everything. I look at it as it's a journey. It's a spectrum, right? It's you're not one day I'm running virtual machines, the next day containers. There's a lot of road to cover before you get from point A to point B. And so we talk to organizations, they're aware of some of the value that containers bring, that Kubernetes brings. So they're looking for things like, scalability, portability. There's some IT cost savings to be had there. They're looking for the ability to, multi-clouds. I want to run my application in multiple clouds. So they're aware of the benefits that it brings, but then they have a ton of questions like, how do I get started? How do I go from virtual machines to containers, and where all the process in between? And there's always a lot of there's always a lot of this idea of, how do I got to change my tooling? My developer workflow is going to be different. There's so many questions, and it's not just, to me, it's not just a matter of technology. It's the people, it's the process that surrounds it. So there's always a lot of questions around, how do we containerize our applications? How do we go more cloud native? Do we want to run these workloads in public clouds or on premise? Can we run them on premise? Kubernetes is a cloud native type of technology. Is it possible for us to do these things on prem? And so, you have these conversations, and and again, there's a lot of moving parts. It's a black box, and then that's that's the getting started of it. That's the why do I want to do Kubernetes, and what benefits are there? And then the next sort of step is, okay, how do I get going down that road? So we talk to
So
folks that have. Go ahead. Yeah.
So what you're saying is someone went to a KubeCon or a DockerCon or some talk and they saw Kelsey Hightower, relating back to like the video that's been going around a little bit, talk like the Seinfeld joke when they saw Kelsey Hightower do something. They're like, hey, we can do that. And then like, let's go ahead and reach out and see how we can get started with Kubernetes. He made it look so easy. And let me answer a question in Twitch real quick. So what is the 9 in Platform 9? Does it have a story? Well, it's a reference to Harry Potter, Platform 9, and was it 3/4? Am I
Yeah.
off? Like I think that's it. So it's a reference to that. But let's go back to Mike. So they just got back from seeing a presentation from Kelsey, which that was my first real actually introduction when he was moving between CoreOS and Google to Kubernetes, as I went to a little thing down here in Portland. They got excited.
Mhm.
They came to their management and said, look at this, we can do this. This makes it so easy. And then they come to you, right? Like, and do you have to put anything in like perspective for that? Like, well, there's a little bit more to it. That's kind of like just showing off like a little bit of stuff, but it's not like he makes it look simple when there's a little bit more to it.
There's a lot under the hood, as they say, and that's exactly it. Folks start, and they may have gone through the exercise of, okay, I can go stand up a little, I can go run Minikube on my laptop and to go, play with some apps and stuff like that. Easy, real straightforward, piece of cake. But then when you start doing this whole thing about now, okay, production, how do I scale it? I productionalize this. They have a lot of questions and around. It's a big leap to go from running an app in Minikube on a laptop to a fully deployed, operationalized Kubernetes cluster that's got all the tooling around it to make it operational. And so that's where folks kind of start. They that, and just like you said, you see that initial sort of Kubernetes is awesome. It can do all these great things. It's fantastic, and it does. It's cool. It can do a lot of stuff, but it requires it's a different mindset, it's different tooling. It's an ocean shift, as they say, for an organization. And so there's a lot of questions. How do where do we start? Where do we begin? So those are a lot of the things that we get kind of early on. It's around how do I make sure as I'm building this out that I'm not going down the wrong path. How do I make sure that what I'm starting to build now will still be functional, will be operational when I go to scale it? There's so many unknowns. But there's a lot of power that comes. So yeah.
Rene, do you have any comments or anything on that? Like, do you have any insights? Have you had anybody come to you like, oh, this is awesome, and then all of a sudden, so we'll go like we'll like jump over to day 2, we'll kind of mix it. They go from talking to Mike, they're all pumped, they're excited, they get a POC going, they're like, oh, this is super easy, and then they come over to Rene and they're like, wait a minute, now we've got like 30 developers on this. How do we manage this? Like, do we give each person their own cluster? How do we do like ownership of anything?
I mean, exactly, and I think it's pretty common for users to underestimate what it takes to truly manage like a production grade Kubernetes cluster, especially one without like a managed provider. And in many cases, like when someone inherits or becomes in charge of a Kubernetes cluster or like infrastructure in general, it may sound pretty daunting at first, and it could be a lot of pressure, especially considering how heavily their business relies on it.
All right, we're going to go back to the excitement with Mike. It's day 1 or day 0, and we're getting excited. We're pumped about it. So, what kind of use cases or scenarios do you get from customers? You're like, well, maybe you're not ready to move directly to Kubernetes. Like maybe they've got legacy stuff. Like maybe virtualization is your next step instead of going directly to containers, or maybe we can help you get to virtualization, and then we can start talking about containers and changing the way you're doing things. Like what kind of use cases have you had to turn away and be like, well, maybe that's not really a good fit?
And those, so virtualization's been around for a while, so I've started working with virtualization 20 plus years ago. So it's been around for a while. A lot of people, there's almost nobody's just running, single application, single server. People don't, that's not efficient. But there's a sweet spot, right? Where Kubernetes is great, but it's not always the right tool for every job. And so when folks are looking at like, this move from what's the better fit, virtualization or containerization for my application, there's questions that go with that. So for example, organizational maturity. There's a lot of organizations that are they don't have the skill set, the talent on hand. Kubernetes, again, is a whole different beast. their virtual machines can look and feel and behave very much like, traditional servers. So you've got a lot of, years and years and years of built up knowledge around that. Everybody knows how these things work. Everybody knows how to maintain them, how to manage them, how to, automate. I need to update my nodes. How do I automate these things? These are known things. And so organizational maturity is a thing. And then we talk to organizations that they want to be able to run an application, but maybe it's a third-party app, and they're locked into this application. The app hadn't been updated. It's not, the app requires the whole entire OS. So they want to run these third-party apps. Sorry guys, you can't. They're not, that support's not available. They have to stay in virtual machines. And the last one will be around things like security and isolation. So you have better controls around being able to fully isolate a virtual machine, and you have, there's some more security practices, I think, they're again more time proven, more honed, from using with VMs versus Kubernetes. So those types of teams that are looking for that type of stuff, those are kind of those key things. Like, can my application be containerized? Do I have isolation and security requirements? Does the app need a full OS stack to go with it? And in those cases, we'll tell those folks, like, virtualization is probably your better option for now. And then here's how you might start thinking about continuing down that path towards containerization. So yeah, there's reasons why VMs are still kind of a thing.
Let's go to Rene then. So Mike tells them this, but someone's like, "Oh, I still want to do Kubernetes." Do you have any customer stories where virtualization was the right answer and they moved to Kubernetes anyways, and it was like just a huge hurdle to get over to move into that? Like, maybe it slowed down their rollout to production, or maybe Mike's good at selling virtualization instead of going directly to Kubernetes, and you haven't seen that.
I'm going to be 100% honest. I haven't come across that scenario, thankfully. Yeah, I really haven't. I do believe that Mike has done a really good job, like, vetting through the whole process. So yeah.
So we'll go back to Mike. So in the last, so when does it make? All right. So we got a question from Twitch. When does it make sense to move from like Docker, Compose, and Swarm to Kubernetes? I'll go to Mike first. Like maybe networking related, and go ahead.
There's reasons. It's the biggest factor that I think we've seen. Rene probably has some experience here as well, I think. But the biggest thing I've seen has been, so when it gets hard to manage, right? So when you start looking at, like, okay, I've got all these, I've got the X number of containers running. Now I'm running into management issues. How do I update? I need to update my application. How do I make sure that, my containers get updated appropriately? Or, now I've gone from, I started off with maybe 10 or 20 containerized applications. Now I've got hundreds, and it's just become a real challenge to manage these things. So in that scenario, you're halfway home in the sense that, your apps have been containerized. So good on you, cool. But it's when that becomes a big challenge to manage them as kind of single entities versus, kind of orchestrating them using Kubernetes. And that's kind of what I see. And like I said, I'd be curious what Rene thinks about that, because you probably get a little different look at that than I do.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Oh, I think we lost Rene for a second. We'll wait till he comes back. So let's. So I'm not as great with. I've used Docker Compose, but I haven't used Swarm that much. Does Swarm support the same type of setup as Kubernetes would with Ingress? Right? Like, is it as easy to set up Ingress controllers and like share a single load balancer between like multiple different deployments and stuff, and use like? Here, I'll let you go.
Well, I was going to say, and this won't take long. I'm not a Swarm guy myself, so the only thing I had to relate to is what I've heard from our folks that we're talking to. And so off the top of my head, I wish I had a better answer, but it's just the sort of thing where I've only got that kind of secondhand sort of knowledge in terms of where that fits.
All right, I'll drop Rene off for a minute while he hops back in, so he's not just frozen. He's gonna be like, "Why did you leave me on? Just frozen for so long." All right, so he's connecting back. All right, so we'll keep going. For the most part, similar. Yeah, I think some of the stuff I've heard offhand just from talking to like Esten and stuff is maybe like networking related stuff, and once you get like so many things running. But like I said, I really went directly from OpenStack to just Docker, like on your desktop and locally, or running like just Docker on a server and then hosting it there, to Kubernetes. Just because it seemed like the market was moving there a little bit faster. Oh, here we got Rene back.
Yeah.
All right, here we got Rene back.
And I think that's also a pretty solid answer is, over time, Kubernetes has kind of evolved to be the de facto sort of standard. And so you're going to have better tooling, you're going to have better support, you're going to have more choices to make in terms of how you operationalize that versus, a Docker Swarm or something like that. And it's just because Kubernetes has just become that de facto standard. So
I think Rene, he was asking you, like, yeah, what you got the question before you?
Yeah, let's go ahead and repeat that just in case.
All right. So the question was, why would you move from, Docker Swarm, for example, to Kubernetes? And so basically, I kind of went over kind of what it looks like from folks that are kind of thinking about making that move and the sort of thoughts that they have. And then my thought here was that, you've got that now I've seen it happen. What do you see is from your side of the table? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen I've only had experiences with one customer that's moved from Docker Swarm or from Swarm to Kubernetes, but just immediately they saw the benefits of just like the managed service itself and the and just Kubernetes. So I think even in terms of like scaling or like sizing the containers and other like operational things.
So like CRDs, right? Like maybe CRDs is a big sell. Like I heard something interesting a couple years ago from one of my friends that made me think about Kubernetes differently, saying it's like a development platform. The fact that I can make custom resource definitions and I can just describe things in a way that I want to and translate that to Kubernetes and other resources means that I have more power to create things beyond just container orchestration. Like you got whole companies that are getting built out of that, like like Crossplane and stuff like that. Is that kind of thing. Being able to just have everybody come into this one platform, describe, I need this, this, and this, and then have a way for a controller that's built in there to take that information and just do whatever with it. Like that's awesome. Like I don't know if Compose has that. So that might be something different too. Like maybe it's expanded now beyond just a orchestration engine.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, not sure what Compose but does as far as that goes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the ability to declaratively specify, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need, and then leave it up to the schedulers, the Kubernetes components to go and then kind of make it so to speak. So there's a lot of power in that. Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to another question for Mike. So do you have any fun like POC stories or anything like that? Some proof of concepts that you set up where maybe someone beforehand was like, oh, we don't need Kubernetes. And then you went in and did a POC and they actually saw the benefits of it, right? Like moving from maybe bare metal or virtual machines. And it was just like a aha moment or something like that they figured it out.
Yeah, there's a couple, and these have both been fairly recent, and I think it's pretty cool. And that so we had back to this organization that was just kind of kicking the tires of Kubernetes. They really they wanted to go in that direction. They had some applications that had been containerized, but they weren't they hadn't really spent a lot of time with Kubernetes. And so whenever we're working with a with a customer on proof of concept, we have a standardized sort of test cases. We have a suite of test cases that we go through, and it starts with deploying the cluster and standing up some applications, and we create some RBAC policies, and we kind of kick the tires all around. And so part of that process then is we'll deploy an application. So we've got a couple test applications that will do various and sundry things. But I think one of the more interesting ones, or one of the ones that's always kind of fun to go through, is we have a test app that basically shows what a blue-green deployment looks like in Kubernetes. And so for folks that have never seen that or experienced it, it's just this was so we roll out this blue-green, we updated the application, we kind of showed them that how that CI/CD pipeline kind of fits in the grand scheme of things, or I can update my app in my my GitHub, and then everything else kind of happens automatically, and I can specify, push this to staging, push it to production, so that capability. So working with this organization, and we did exactly that. I updated an app, and we showed them how to automate, the whole automated process that goes with it. And they were just, the roofs of their heads came off, and they were like, "This is the greatest thing. It's so cool." And so that I think is just, seeing that light bulb moment for some of those people is like, it's just the coolest thing to see. The other one that kind of caught me off guard that I wasn't prepared for was KubeVirt. So we've been doing a lot of work with KubeVirt lately, and we have a large customer that's running that's been doing a lot of testing KubeVirt. And so we set up a proof of concept with them. And part of that we went through was performance testing. And I never
Let's
really,
describe what a kubevert is real quick. That's like run virtual machines in containers, containerized
yeah,
libvirt.
you got it. It's exactly it. It flips the old model upside down. Instead of running my Kubernetes containers on top of VMs, I run my VMs inside containers. That's exactly it. Yeah, for folks that aren't familiar. And so it gives you a way so you run your VMs on pods within your cluster. You use Kubernetes tooling to manage the virtual machines. But what I wasn't prepared for, and the cool part, the thing where we said, "Whoa, look at this." Um, Performance-wise, we were able to squeeze better performance out of KubeVirt than we were out of native VMs. And I think one of our engineering folks went back and looked at it. And I think it's because we're shipping a newer version of KubeVirt a new, I can't talk, a newer version of libvirt with KubeVirt. And so we actually see better performance with virtual machines running in Kubernetes, which I was not at all prepared for. But that was another one of those light bulb moments where you're like, this opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities. So yeah, I love both those stories there.
All right, so now you hand it off to Rene, and then they're like, "We've done too much." Like they get to day two or whatever, and they've installed Istio, they've installed all these other things, and they're like, "We can't do anything. We don't know what's going on." So
Yeah.
what exciting stories do you have, Rene, where someone saw the power of it? Maybe they went a little bit too far, and you had to kind of help them get back to like maybe do it this way, or give them like best I don't know, best use cases and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, so what we do is like we meet with our customers on a regular basis, and we stay engaged as much as we possibly can. And the reason we do this is just so that way we have like a clear understanding of their short and long term goals, like what are they doing, and ultimately to ensure that whatever they are doing aligns with industry best practices. So, and we'll often have times where we'll have dedicated sessions with like a solutions architect or maybe even sometimes even someone from engineering where we can kind of just make sure or steer them in the right direction.
So I think some of the interesting things I've seen with some of our solution architects too is that like, everybody's learning. I mean, some people know like what to do with everything, but sometimes they're learning with the customer to help them like do things, right? Like they see a use case they've never seen before, and it's like, well, how do we figure
Right.
this out? How do we get this done? So like everyone's excited about like engineering some new setup, like getting Metal LB to run in a service provider and figuring out like how their networking works, or like how do I get L2
Right.
networking set up in a cloud provider easily if they don't have like a private cloud setup. Do you have any interesting like weird stories where you've had to troubleshoot something that you hadn't seen before or something fun like that?
So I mean, one that kind of comes to mind is just someone trying to create a cluster that was maybe like 400 nodes or something of that sort, and we came across some like actual limitations with a specific contain or using flannel. So in that case, we had to kind of propose Calico as the recommended option
That's a big
for
change too,
especially
right?
for that scale.
For someone that's deployed like
Yeah.
that, that's a big change. But luckily, I guess you just went back and like removed the deployment. They weren't in production, maybe, and then you just like changed a setting in like the deployment engine, well, our engine. But
Right. Right.
let's go over Renee. Let me see. What question do I have? All right. So what are some of the biggest concerns you see customers have when they've been handed an environment? So Mike gets them all set up, or Mike gets them excited, gets a POC going, gets handed over, and we start deploying an environment for him. You're helping them out with that like day one. What are some of the biggest concerns you see about day one? Not getting to day two yet, where they've actually started using it all the time.
So with day one, I think sometimes some of the more common things we'll see is typically related to like network related issues. Sometimes they're at the infrastructure level, so we have to do some debugging to really narrow that down. I would say networking issues are probably more common, but it's definitely something we're prepared to troubleshoot and identify whenever we run into that. That's what comes to mind right now, at least for day one.
So you're kind of acting like as go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, let me pile, I want to pile on that for just 1 second, because there's a couple things that I think are somewhere between, day zero, day one. And so it kind of falls into that guise of what I like to think of as operationalizing a cluster. So I've got my cluster up and running, it's happy, it's good. But the concerns that I always see folks asking, and maybe Rene can also expand on this a little bit, but there's a lot of new things to learn. Storage is completely different in Kubernetes than it is, virtual machine. So there's always, how does storage work? What's a persistent volume? What's a PVC? So those are questions. And I think the other ones that to me are interesting are, how do I secure the platform? So again, a lot of folks look at this as like it's a black box, so how do I secure the platform? How do I monitor it? What about logging? It's a distributed platform. Pods are spitting out logs all over the place. How do I correlate these logs? How do I make sense of them? How do I turn my log files into, this is an application issue, this is an infrastructure issue? So these are the things that folks, that get brought up a lot. And to me, that's kind of, I guess it's kind of in that gap between, hey, we just got a Kubernetes cluster up and running, and that day one, day two operations. But that's the sort of stuff, like, I hear a lot of concerns around those types of areas.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So
absolutely.
go ahead, Rene.
Oh, I was going to say another thing too is typically around the ingress strategy as well. So whenever we
Yeah.
come across that, we'll work closely with our customers to like have a deep dive on ingress and find, craft a solution that works best for them.
Gotcha. So we had a question in Twitch. So how is Platform 9 different than OpenShift? Uh, I'm not going to explain it because Mike probably gets that question all the time. Let's let Mike. What do you tell a customer? Customers like, hey, well, how's this different? What's your
Better. No, it's no, it's I think the key differences is vendor lock-in, right? So OpenShift, it's been around for a bit, but there's a lot of, you're not using native Kubernetes tooling, right? So my command line is not necessarily going to be like a kube control, kubectl, you hear folks call it. I have to use the OpenShift command line tooling. There's limits in terms of, supported, OSs and such underneath as well. So I think those are the biggest differences. The other part of it is, and I don't want to wear too much of a sales hat here today, but the other thing is our support, right? So, and I think, and Rene knows what I'm talking about here, that our support's like unparalleled. And I'm not saying that because I'm working for the company and, trying to sell some stuff. But we genuinely have a really solid team, and it's a very proactive type of thing. And so, we're typically able to go, see something's going on in an environment, have that issue resolved before our customers even know it happened. So I think those are the really key differentiators. And again, without going too salesy on the whole thing, but yeah, if you're looking at Kubernetes stuff, give us a shout.
I'll play the other side too. Some like OpenShift because it's opinionated, and they trust Red Hat and they trust their opinions, and they just want something that they can use, that a lot of decisions have been made for them. But that can be great in the beginning, and it can actually work for you over the lifetime of it. But what if you want to do something different, right? Like, and you just want to use something completely vanilla without that opinion set on top of it. You could benefit from using something else, right? Like, not going into cost or anything like that. Let's go. So Rene, like what you're kind of touching on is that you have to help with networking and stuff too. Like, we come in and we're kind of like a extension of their team, but like a platform team. So we're talking to networking engineers, we're talking to systems engineers, we're talking to the DevOps team and stuff like that. Sometimes companies already have that, but then sometimes we can kind of like expand what they have and help them with exactly what they need to set up when they aren't sure, right? Like, so you talk to all these different teams. Like, is that kind of what you're saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we interact with all sorts of people from different organizations, but and one thing, I mean, kind of one question we commonly get, and this kind of goes around the board, but is typically around upgrades. And I People are curious to know like how the upgrade process works, and I totally get it, right? Upgrades can be a major pain point and or a sore subject based on something that may have happened to them in the past. But fortunately with Platform 9, we have zero touch upgrades, and you can upgrade your cluster without having any impact here, the applications.
All right, so let me get to my next question for Rene. So, like, say a customer's onboarded and it's you've made it through day one, you've answered some questions, now it's day two. Are you more hands on or hands off? Like, do you give them like time to figure stuff out and make mistakes and then help them with it, or is there a lot more hand holding usually? What happens day
Um,
two?
yeah, well, I mean, I guess we're as hands-on as each customer wants us to be, but like I said earlier, we typically remain engaged with with pretty much all of our customers, and as we meet with them on a recurring basis. But regardless, if there's a particular topic that a customer is interested in, and we have a subject matter expert in that area, we're more than happy to set aside some time and provide some guidance around that.
All right, hold on. I'm checking to see if there's any comments on LinkedIn. If anyone has any questions too, feel free to ask some questions. We got some questions in Twitch, but we can take questions on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So let's think. So what do you we'll start with Rene, then we go to Mike. What do you prefer? What was more fun for you as a technology? Was it, I'll ask you and then I'll provide my feedback. OpenStack or Kubernetes? Because I remember the first time I installed OpenStack by hand back in like 2013, 2014. And then I started,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I worked for a government contractor, and they didn't want to bring in Chef or Puppet or any of these other software things because they had to vet it before it went into a skiff. Like, so they wanted me to just do it by hand and do the configuration. So I was like SCPing configuration files over. The worst way to do it, right? Like Chef was getting a lot of traction then. Like I wish I could have used that because it would have better prepared me. But like installing Kubernetes for the first time, it didn't feel like I did anything. Like that was the biggest difference, which
right,
was the most interesting thing, right? Like OpenStack, I did stuff. It took me a couple hours. I could get a setup going and install it. Kubernetes came around. I didn't feel like I did anything. Like I didn't feel like anything was installed. But then like it worked. So that was awesome. Like I didn't have networking problems. What did you have more fun troubleshooting, Rene, and working with? Do you like virtual machines more, or are you enjoying the complexity of Kubernetes going up the stack a little bit more?
I over time, I'm definitely leaning way more towards Kubernetes now. With OpenStack, it was great and all, like, and it is still great today. Um, but in terms of like actually building the environment, it's just far more simple with Kubernetes and significantly faster as well.
So it's more fun to troubleshoot. What about you, Mike? Did you do some troubleshooting for virtual machines and stuff before this? You said you were at Hortonworks, so I don't know. You were probably using VMs, maybe OpenStack even.
Actually, yeah, a little both. And I think, and I would echo Rene in that Kubernetes by far is the more interesting thing to play with. But I think coming up through OpenStack, or at least having some acquaintance with how that type of stuff behaves, is almost a stepping stone to understanding how Kubernetes works. They share a lot of commonalities in the fact that they're distributed systems. You have, different components responsible for different types of behavior within the platform. But in terms of having to work with it day to day, for what it's worth, whenever we stand up an OpenStack proof of concept, it can take days to a week longer, whereas a Kubernetes proof of concept can be done in a day. It's so
Yeah.
much quicker to get up and running. It's so much quicker to deploy apps, and troubleshooting a black box under the hood. But in general, there's the troubleshooting is a little more straightforward. You're not having to look at as many bits and pieces, I guess, for lack of a better term. But Kubernetes all day, absolutely.
You're not going into every single service you've installed in OpenStack and looking at the logs to see what's happened. And then you're not. I
Right.
know Rene probably doesn't miss hopping on a WebEx every couple of days about what's going on with RabbitMQ. Why aren't these queues? You're like, why aren't they dropping? What does this fan out mean?
Yes,
What is all of this?
messages not getting consumed, and yeah,
My
it's
network's
a
not working.
nightmare.
Can you help me troubleshoot OVS? And you're like, oh, I gotta get help with this just because it's so complicated to get down in there. But like, yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
you haven't really seen anything like that with Kubernetes. Like you're more so troubleshooting, why is this service not working? And then you're troubleshooting YAML instead of actually going in and troubleshooting configuration files. And well, configuration file it is, right? But like you're not troubleshooting logs as much in the same way, and it's easier to access those logs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
All right.
I had flashbacks there when you mentioned OBS. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's not much in the way of a good time.
Well, say luckily you can get a certain depth with OpenStack. There's just so much, so you get a little bit further into each of those, but then you have to rely on the experts for each service, which is
Oh yeah.
a lot harder for building out an organization to have an expert on each service. Whereas in Kubernetes, it doesn't feel like you do that as much, right? Like, I mean, I definitely enjoy using Kubernetes and troubleshooting issues with it a lot more because I'm not focused on what configuration trouble or configuration issues I made. I'm looking at my YAML and saying, what did I do wrong? Like, why is it saying,
Hmm.
this isn't working? Or like I try to apply it and it tells me exactly what's wrong instead of just giving me like a Python traceback. And I'm like, what? Like heat was one of the most
Oh
annoying things to
gosh.
troubleshoot in OpenStack, but I feel like with Kubernetes, I'm just there. Like it's just so easy. Like I don't have to have this app catalog. I mean, I can use an app catalog with like Helm, which is interesting. But like if I just
Yeah.
want to like deploy something that's interesting and have have a public name for it, like in like my mpetersen.com, I can just send that and it all works, right? Like it's not like I have to do extra stuff. Like I don't have to configure everything. All right, I'm droning on, but let's see. Let's go to see if there's any more questions. I don't think there's anything right now. Someone said thanks. They attended a previous talk with Madura and was impressed. Madura's a great speaker. Like I'd love to have. I'm gonna have Madura on here eventually too, and see if I can pick her brain on stuff. She's great at talking about like basically any subject you want to ask her about. But let's go to. We'll start with Mike. Anything else you want to add as we're kind of coming up to time? Anything else you want to share? Like any insights on maybe we kind of talked about getting from day 0 to day 2, but we didn't go strictly through it. Or any insights you want to share for people thinking about moving?
It's just, I'd say that the biggest thing is, as far that the technology is the only part of it, right? So going from virtual machines to containers, the technology bits and pieces of it are only one part. I think the more challenging part for organizations that don't have anything containerized at all yet is getting that mindset for those developer teams, the tooling set up, because developing towards, cloud native type apps is looks completely different than developing towards, virtualized type environments. So, start small, kind of, I'd say most organizations, you can kind of start off a little bit and don't bite off more than you chew, eating the proverbial elephant, so to speak. But, think about your tooling, think about the process, think about how it's going to affect your developers' day-to-day type activities. That's one of the bigger parts versus just the technology.
So before I go to Rene too, I think it's interesting with Kubernetes to where like you do have custom resource definitions. You can get your developers engaged and interested. Like you install OpenStack, no one really cares. They're not going to be like, oh, I'm gonna get my developers to make something interesting for OpenStack, right? Like they're going to go to the community and submit that. But if you want to create your own CRD internally to create things for users or make it easier for users, you can do that, right? Like so, it's kind of exciting for people that want to move into like Golang, or you've got a bunch of developers in house and you want to make things easier, interesting. Like you can do that. There's a framework to do that, right? Like there wasn't that, you didn't have that with OpenStack really. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Just working between developers and admins and stuff. And that's why you get like platform teams and stuff. So let's go to Rene. Do you have anything else interesting you'd like to share or talk about? Or maybe on the day 1, day 2 journey?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as the day 2 journey goes, like kind of like Mike was saying earlier, that we continuously monitor all the clusters, and I think that our customers have the ultimate peace of mind knowing that they're backed by our SLA, and yeah,
So
we're here to help every step of the way.
say someone that's not platform 9 and they're just moving on day 1, day 2. You have any advice for them? We don't have to bring it. You could be like, well, generally I like to tell people this. Like say someone else is just asking you like we're at a bar and like okay I've installed just like vanilla Kubernetes. What's the first thing I should install day 1 to make things easier for myself? Do I jump to Istio? Is that too much? Or like do I get an ingress controller and just start from there? What do I install day 1 to make things interesting and easy? Oh, Rene, I think Rene got kicked off too. We'll go to Mike. Like, what would you say to like someone at a bar saying, "Hey, what do I do? What do I do day 1 or 2? What do I do? I've got this installed. What is it for?" Right? Like, obviously,
Yeah.
having Metal LB and like a load balancer. Well, we're saying we have Metal LB and a load balancer, so you can use any demo you want out there. What do you say to install day 1 or day 2?
Yeah, and so this gets into, and I wish I wish Rene hadn't gotten dropped off, but because this is much more up his alley. But in general, it's a journey. So don't, like I said earlier, don't try to, build the whole thing all at once. Start off with what you need, right? So you may not need it. I'm testing some basic microservices, some applications in a cluster. I may not need Ingress day one. I may need a load balancer because, that's probably a little more important, being able to expose your service. But, Ingress, let's figure that out later on. And the same thing, storage. So maybe we start just to kind of dip our toes in the water with stateless apps that don't require storage, and then later on, then we start looking at integrating storage. So I would say, the important things are going to be, your basic infrastructure. How do I monitor? How do I log? And then how do I, basic stuff. How do I expose my application? Load balancing. And then from there, build piece by piece as your application demands it.
So I'll ask you another question. We'll see if Rene can get back in. He's actually on the road and just trying to hop in. He's being a good sport and helping us out. So Mike, what has changed, you think, in the last 2 to 3 years related to stateful apps, like with the new storage editions? Like, are you more so recommending stateful apps and stuff than you would have been like 2 or 3 years ago when maybe that wasn't a great time for them?
Yeah, I don't know, I don't know about that. I wouldn't necessarily say, a better time or not. I think folks are just more comfortable with the idea now. Like 2, 3, 4 years ago, if you'd have said, let's run your database in Kubernetes, that's like, oh, no, 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 we're not going to do that. Now folks are much more open to it because, there was this initial sort of thought that Kubernetes was, it was designed for stateless workloads. We don't need to worry. We don't want to run a database in Kubernetes. But then as Kubernetes becomes more and more of a mainstream tool versus just a cloud hyperscaler type of thing, more and more organizations get more and more exposure to it. And then people start coming up with better ideas how to use it, how to use the tooling. So there's been a shift now. 3 or 4 years ago, you would have never even dreamed of running a database or something similar in Kubernetes. Now there are folks doing that, and there are people much more open to it because I think not only has the ecosystem evolved, but people's knowledge and understanding of what can be done with Kubernetes has also changed and evolved as well. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest things there.
I think one of the interesting things too, like say early, like 2010 or so, is the virtualization and stuff and the different things that came out around it. People were ephemeral. Everything should be ephemeral. And so like I had developers and stuff who would launch a VM, and the thing that we were actually using it wasn't backed by persistent storage. Everything got deleted when you deleted or turned it off. So you couldn't actually launch a VM and then turn it off and then turn it back on. So like this whole idea of like previously like everything's ephemeral and like we can't save state and everything. It seems like Kubernetes, it felt that way in the beginning, and now it's like not that at all. So like it's interesting to see how it just reflects what's happened in virtual machines. And it's hard to break people from the idea that things can live for such a long time, right? Like it's interesting to say it and practice and say, hey, do this. But on the other side, if you're supporting somebody and you're supporting a developer who wants something that lives forever, like you're going to have to support that. So you got to figure out a way to do it. But I think looks like Rene's having issues getting back in. So I think we kind of hit time there. I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. Thank you for joining. And I hope everybody got something out of this. Let's say, let you say bye.
Bye, everyone. Right. Appreciate everyone that joined. Thanks for y'all's time.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll be back next Friday. Let me do the if you want, you can join us. Here, pop them up. Join us on Slack, slack.platform9.io. You can join the conversation. And if you want, you can join our State of Cloud Native channel. But if you don't want to do that, you can reach out to me directly if you want to learn more at M. Petersen. Mike's on there too if you want to reach out to him. And if you want like a demo or something like that, just let us know. Anyways, thank you.